it was like I'm going and it's getting black, and I could feel like the effect of like less air and less air and less air. And you always hear these stories of people saying that they're going to light. There was, some relative from their past, or it wasn't like that. It was like the darkest, coldest, scariest place that I never want to go back to.
This is Hard Knocks Talks.
Milan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Daniel.
Yeah, first podcast recording at 2025. Let's go.
Woo, inaugural.
Yeah. So our mutual friend Safa from Sacred Rebels Recovery connected us. And you are a musician trapped in a realtor's body, as you self-proclaim. You've written a bagillion songs. And you're
bagillion one.
and podcaster. You've been podcasting for how long now?
6 weeks.
6 weeks. That's it.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
But it's going super well. I feel, that it was something I was supposed to do.
Is there anything that you'd like to expand on there before we really jump into your story?
Well, I would just like to say that, at this point in my life, I consider myself struck with recovery fever. I just want to help show other people that there's a happy way to live after addiction.
Mm-hmm. So you've been sober 16 months now?
15 and a half. Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
And
15 and a bit, but yep.
From what you have told me, like your transition into recovery was pretty intense. It involved Vancouver emergency room, and there's quite a story around that. But before we jump into that, why don't we go back? Why don't we go all the way back? Why don't you tell us how this all got started for you?
My mom was a smoker even while she was pregnant. I was definitely addicted to cigarettes from being an embryo. Everybody smoked inside every house. Even non-smokers had ashtrays on their kitchen tables at that point in Ontario growing up. And I had my first cigarette at 4 years old, a Craven Green. I asked my babysitter if I could have one. He thought he was going to teach me a lesson. And so I smoked the whole thing. And he thought, okay, this kid's going to turn green, blah, blah, blah. And I looked at him and I said, can I have another? And he looked at me like he had opened Pandora's box. And so I didn't get to have another cigarette. In grade 5, there was 5 boys that lived on the street, all in the same kind of section of houses. And we split a pack of cigarettes. So we smoked 5 cigarettes each. And some of the guys got really, really sick. I put them in the pocket of my coat and got taken to judo with my mom. And while I was in judo, she found the smokes in my coat. She wasn't mad that I was smoking. She thought I had stole her cigarettes. And she was mad about theft. And she's like, I didn't raise a thief. And so it broke my heart. It was a real moment of change and trust in my relationship with my mom at that point, where I was like, oh, okay, she just doesn't believe me even when I'm telling the truth. Dad he was paralyzed with MS when I was conceived, and he died when I was 4. As a child, my mom felt like, okay, we only had one parent. She wanted to love us for 2. She was extremely, extremely loving, but the city that I grew up in was extremely not loving. It was rough. I had to fight once a week from 3 years old to grade 10. Like if you went more than 2 blocks unaccompanied by a friend, there would be people there to challenge you for being on their blocks. That fueled the need to escape when it came time to the opportunity for substances, for sure.
When you came across it, did it feel wrong? Like, did you know that you weren't supposed to do that?
Everybody drank in Oshawa. I never met a sober, like a non-drinking person until my late 30s.
Mm.
So everybody drank. And it was just whether somebody drank and had a drug problem too or not. And so, like, it was, it was customary then that kids would go and get the drink for their parents just as something to do. And by the time it was like grade 10 and going to a party, that was just normal.
Yeah.
And, so it was hard to think that you had a problem when that's what everybody was doing.
So this wasn't even something that was a consideration in your mind. Like you just there was no other way.
You hear often that marijuana is a gateway drug,
Mm.
you know? And for years, I wouldn't have said so. At the age of 15, I crossed the line and started smoking. And this was a real turning point in my attitude towards society because at the time it was Nancy Reagan, like,
Yeah.
just say no.
Mm-hmm.
And, this is your brain on drugs. And they've got the frying pan with the eggs. And guess what? The thing about it is that they don't tell you about the euphoria that you experience in the early moments of using any drug.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what that does in my mind, and what it did in my life, is it made them all liars, all the adults liars. I'm
Mm.
like, oh, you're lying that this is bad. I'm like, so what else are you lying about? What else are you saying is bad that I'm going to find completely freaking amazing? you
Mm.
know like
Mm.
and it really gave me a distrust for society right at that point, because at that point it was kind of like become one of the sheep for a factory or go my own way. And then going
Mm.
into the hallucinogens, we went from doing that one night to the next time doing 14 trying to go see God.
You use terminology like, like you go to see God. What was your understanding of all of this at the time? Like, was these just slang terms that you didn't really understand the deeper meaning to them, or were you having spiritual experiences? Like, were you shaping your spiritual understanding with these substances?
I've always believed in like a interconnectedness of energy, where um, if you want to call the universe a name, it doesn't have to be God and it doesn't have to be male or female in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for the first time, it was like I could see the trees breathe. I could feel the clouds breathe. And I felt a real connectedness with that. And so, my experience of saying I wanted to go see God, it was like I felt like I could almost just fly up to outer space in those states,
Mm-hmm.
and just like a oneness with the universe that I wasn't feeling before that, for sure.
And you recognize that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, me and my friends would literally sit and watch the earth, like the trees breathe. Like, we would go, there was certain trees would, they seem to have a greater respiration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And were there conversations with you and your friends about this spirituality, about this oneness, about this source energy?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We would, like, if somebody noted a significant difference in how things seemed, we would talk about it. And it was, if I mean, e- either it was a greater connectedness or it was a group hallucination that was, not just individual. Like, there was one particular acid we got. It was these little pink microdots, and they brought about the craziest color hallucinations. And so, in addition to that sort of vibrance and breathing quality to the world, it was as if it would like flash over a color, and then
Mm.
another color came, and we were seeing like almost the same colors, at least that we could describe at the same time.
Mm.
Like, I would be ready to say like pink, and Adam would say pink, and see purple, and John would say purple, and Mike would say green as I saw green approaching. That one night was definitely one of the most unreal experiences of that I've ever experienced in a connectedness with other people at the same time. I got Bell's palsy And the reason that that's significant is that that was the beginning of my music in my life.
Mm.
Because at that point, I had a half paralyzed face at the age of, 19 and a half or 19 and three quarters about. Like, I don't know if you've ever had something like that, but at, at your late teens, early 20s, you don't want to be the freak with who can't close his eye and wear a patch and not move half his face or say F's or P's or drink water straight because it would pour out of your face. Like it was a month and a half of real um I don't know, it was like a month and a half of real calibration, recalibration of like, like money lost its importance in that period for me.
Mm.
And I started playing guitar anyway in that period. It was just something that captured my heart, and also kind of, like I was not doing well at my courses in university because of the level that I was partying,
Mm.
and then I ended up leaving a credit and a half short of my degrees. Came back out east. I built a place. I cut the trees, milled the wood, built the place for next to nothing, like like kind of like a pioneer sort of thing. And 9 months later, had a chimney fire and lost everything in an hour and 20 minutes. It was a cedar cabin, entirely cedar, with an asphalt shingle roof. Apparently, the flames were like 187 feet high.
Oh.
What I've learned, is that there's lessons from everything in life.
Mm.
And at that time, that was the most tragic thing I could ever imagine. Like, I had worked so hard on that thing. Like, I'd never worked on one single thing like that in my life, or like, enjoyed something that I've done
Mm.
so much in my life. And now I see that as one of the single greatest things that has occurred in my life. Like, that freed me from Ontario, which I truly believe I was not supposed to be living there. It taught me that possessions don't define me. Like what I own and what I have is not Milan. Milan is still here when all that's gone. And then as well, that I can start my life again with nothing at any point. From there forward, I was about 26 at that point. When I was 30 was when sort of the adventure with the harder drugs began.
So, but you're 30 years old now, right?
Yeah.
Like you have a pretty, what I would say, pretty good awareness of the world. So you've seen these things. You've seen people on the street and all of this. And now you are coming into an experience where there's drugs in front of you. What are your thoughts?
I remember working with this one carpenter, and he said, I find cocaine such a loving drug. And I'm picturing my friend having his door kicked in by the bikers while he's running away with one of the bikers' strippers and like going to jail. And I'm like, loving drug? Like, what are you talking about, loving drug?
Mm.
I didn't even, I couldn't even relate. He's like, yeah, he's like, man, every once in a while I get some, and me and my friends, we have a really loving time. And I was like, are we talking about, like, I couldn't even fathom it. But
Mm.
I think it softened my opinion on it because I really liked Steve, and I enjoyed working with him. And to be honest, he had been 100% honest with me. So I think it was like, well, maybe I just haven't seen that side of it. And then I was playing music with another guy, and he said, one day just out of the blue, he was like, I'd really like to get some in jam. I'm like, what? And he's like, oh yeah, trust me, it and music are fabulous. And then him and I ended up trying that. And that ended up turning into about a 2.5 year addiction for me,
Mm.
where it was pretty much every day. I don't regret that addiction, like I don't recommend it, but I don't regret that. I'm grateful that I was able to pull out of it. There was just a point with that addiction where I looked in the mirror and saw like how emaciated I was, and I thought, I'm going to die if I keep doing this. And I literally remember choosing my family, like, because I had a young daughter at that time, choosing my wife and my daughter, and just kind of like locking myself in a trailer for 5 days and just struggling with some withdrawals and going through like probably like 6 months of just unable to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
It was,
Um,
uh, it was really one of the worst, post acute withdrawal symptoms of any substance for sure that I experienced. There's the all good period. Then there's the all good with hiccups. Then
Mm.
there's the hiccups with a bit of good, you know? And then there's the all bad. And then there's the desperate times, right? And
Mm.
for a long time, I just didn't acknowledge the hiccups. So from probably from 2021 to 2023, it got out of control. It became very daily, and a lot of isolating, a lot of lying, and just a lot of health deterioration from it.
Mm. Did you know it was a problem?
I feel like I knew there was a problem in my life for 17 years, but I knew that if I said the A word, addict, that there would never be going back. Like
Mm.
I hear a lot of my friends inside recovery say, recovery ruined my using
Mm.
because they know what they're doing to themselves now. And they know that there's another side of happy sobriety. Like I
Mm.
white knuckled it. I white knuckled it multiple times for multiple months. I even did a 20-month stint before. And all that was filled with was resentment for who I was quitting for because it wasn't me.
Mm.
There wasn't any happiness in it. Like my goal when I went into a treatment center was to learn how to go to a party and be okay with that. Like I didn't even know about a happy, sober life and just that I wouldn't even want the party anymore. In the last 2 years, there was 2 times where I remember being high, my wife like cornering me somewhere and like, are you high? Asking me directly inside myself saying, tell her the truth. Tell her the truth. And being like, no, lying, knowing that she knew I was lying. And inside myself, like, being like, fuck, you're a fucking addict now. Like having that disgust, self disgust. And I watched it kind of, boiling out of control, like watching almost like a passenger at points where,
Mm.
knowing some nights, man, like I could die right now. Like I could just feel pushing my body to the very limits and still not being able to stop. And then
Mm.
I went to a conference. It was about 2 in the morning. I went to bed and very shortly after I woke up and I felt like, those ramps that people would drive like a skidoo or a quad up onto a truck in? How it's
Mm.
like that grated metal? It literally felt like a corner of that, like an L, pushing on both sides like it was a vice. And it felt like that kind of like texture almost. And it was like pushing, and I woke up and I couldn't get air. It was like this whole quadrant couldn't get air on my body. One of my roommates was there with a friend, and then there was another one sleeping on the other bed. I'm just like, call the ambulance. He's like, no, buddy, you're going to be okay. Like he thought I had like heartburn or something.
Mm.
And, and I'm like, no, I'm like, can't breathe, go. And so it was kind of mayhem. And then I kind of got wheeled out of there and taken just a few blocks away to St. Joseph's in downtown Vancouver. And that was like arriving at the asylum. Like,
Mm.
if you think when you're dying that you're about to get some fast service in a city in Canada, like, man, I was like one in a queue, just like floundering, dying, in my chair. And there was people, just like rows of people screaming on both sides of this hallway in chairs. Like there was way too many people for that hospital to even consider assisting at once. I remember thinking like I literally like said my goodbyes to my family through my friend. Like I thought I was going to die. My friend, the one roommate there who came with me, he likened it like he's like I felt like I was in Vietnam, and it
Mm.
was like on a battlefield hospital. Like he could not believe it scarred him. It scarred him so bad that he wouldn't even talk to me for a month and a half. Like he just needed to blank that entire experience. It was like dingy. It was like yellow, the floor. It was so dirty and chaotic. And, like when I look back on it, I'm like, they're just so overwhelmed there and they have no hope of catching up. So, like, to be in that state of fear and then to be surrounded by this like echoing insanity, like it was absolutely like um it was scary. The real impactful moment for me in that whole experience was, it was like I'm going and it's getting black, and I could feel like the effect of like less air and less air and less air. And you always hear these stories of people saying that they're going to a light, or there was some bright light, or there was, some relative from their past, or, like there was no light for me. It wasn't like that. It was like the darkest, coldest, scariest place that I never want to go back to. And then after that, they put me on some kind of like diazepam, kind of benzo thing, I think, just to sort of calm me down after. And then the next thing I know is I woke up in my friend's daughter's apartment because they didn't want to take me back to the conference at the hotel and have me embarrassingly brought in by an ambulance, right, in front of all the other realtors that were there. I I look back and like, I'm happy I'm here. I'm really happy I'm here. And I don't want to insult anybody in the medical profession. I just feel that they're not given a chance to be underwhelmed.
Mm. Hmm.
They're not. They there's not enough budget, and there's not enough education to create enough doctors and nurses for what we need with the population we have. So the next morning, I woke up, and literally my very first thought was, that's over.
Mm.
It was like I knew at that point that my fight with substance was over, and that it was okay for me to stop now.
Mm.
Like inside myself, there was a real kind of a feeling of peace with that. And it turned out that my wife was flying in,
Mm.
and I I I actually felt really good. Like I felt this freedom kind of emanating from that that surrender, like she showed up, just was like, shut up and get in the truck, like didn't want to even talk to me, like she was just scared and angry. So that was September 30th, 2023. So my official clean date would be October 1st, 2023.
Awesome. Let's take a break. Read off today's sponsors.
Okay.
All right. EHN Canada is Canada's leading provider of mental health and addiction services, providing evidence-based and medically assisted care with 1-year wraparound services for those suffering from substance use disorder. In Saskatchewan, their care is 100% supported by Saskatchewan Health. To learn more, find their link in the show notes below. Métis Nation Saskatchewan has announced its path for the pursuit of self-government. As an MNS citizen, I am proud to see my government fight to protect my rights. This is our moment. To learn more about the treaty and our path to self-government, go to ourmoment.ca. Wellness News Choice for Healthy Living is a local resource that works to connect people to health and wellness-related products, services, and expert advice from industry professionals locally, allowing us to connect and engage. Check out wellnessnews.ca or skwellnesshub.ca today to learn more. If you'd like to see our content uncensored, we are now offering channel memberships. There is a lot we can't show you without getting restricted, so if you want the full conversations, or to check out our merch, or if you want to show us some love and buy us a coffee, all of those links are also in the show notes below.
Thank you, sponsors.
Thank you, sponsors. My gosh, what a
Mhm.
ride this has been. As a fellow podcaster and you just getting into it now, you mentioned earlier you're only 6 weeks in. I would like to encourage you to keep going. And the bit of advice, the one thing that I tell all podcasters, and I say this publicly, is if you want to be a good podcaster, you have to be better at building relationships than you are at podcasting. I will say that straight out.
Isn't that the golden fruit of recovery in
It's the golden fruit
itself?
of life, man. Never mind recovery. That is life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just that I feel that, I wasn't given relationship building tools in school like I
Mm-hmm.
have been in recovery.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Mm.
so now you are you're with your mad wife driving back home, upset,
Yes,
but
I
but
would
but
call
but
that
but glowing at the same time because you can feel it, you know. So
yes.
let's jump off there.
Okay. So, what I would call the ride of resentment going home with my wife resenting me. Eh, I, um, I was having already, visions of my freedom. Like
Mm,
I had a different lightness in my heart that I had not been experiencing in the last couple years.
mm-hmm,
Excuse me. Um, my last section of using was tremendously anxiety filled.
mm-hmm,
And part of that is that the addiction had progressed to the point where I was creating delusions in order to use, like I would get angrier at you than I should have. I would get sadder than I should have in a situation. And so my emotions were like a roller coaster. Like this was the first peaceful day feeling that I had had in a long, long time.
mm-hmm,
My wife had already started researching treatment centers and wanted to take me right to one that day. And it was just impossible for me with work. And so I ended up negotiating with her and with the treatment center 2 weeks to sort of set things up so that things were covered for me while I was gone away. The treatment center I went to, it is now has some government funded seats, but it didn't at that point, and it was really expensive. By the time I was going to treatment, I literally had this concept that I was going to jail. Like, I had no clue what to expect. Like my idea, like I showed up saying, "Hi, I'm your new inmate." And they're like, "No, you're our new client." Like first of all, I expected locked doors,
mm,
and I expected a building full of addicts, which, because I didn't understand what an addict was all these years, I expected that guy living under the bridge. I expected the meth head who's stealing the battery out of the truck down the street from me. I didn't expect to regular people like me having problems coping with life.
mm,
And so I was really scared going in that door. But they say recovery was the last door on the block or last house on the block.
mm-hmm,
It was like, it was now death or that, right? So I was entirely willing. And I came in and there was a guy who's now a really good friend of mine, Gabriel. He won't mind me using his name. And he looked up at me and he smiled and he could see I was scared. And he said, "Hey, you're going to be okay." He's like, "You're in the right place." And I remember that one sentence, "You're in the right place." That was the difference between me thinking I was in the wrong place and being in the right place.
mm.
Like it's amazing the power of a little bit of reassurance in words at really vulnerable, critical places. It's something that I say to newcomers all the time now. One of my biggest reservations the entire time when I even just from the outside saw a 12-step program was the God thing.
Mm,
Like, I think I mentioned earlier that my resistance to the concept of God in a Catholic sense was pretty high. So
mm,
over that weekend, I went to 3 meetings, and one of them was one of the counselor at the treatment center's 16-year birthday cake. And so that room was filled with hope and experience. Like what I saw was like people who had been street homeless people, like decades into recovery and family life. And like, you talk about seeing, a life you want, right?
mm,
I wanted happiness in sobriety. And I was given my first visual proof of it over that weekend. I was in the circle, and there was a fairly religious friend who was in the treatment center, and he was sharing on his faith, and I could see the serenity that the assuredness of his faith gave him. I had this epiphany at that moment. Being a musician as I am, I write a lot of songs, and I feel like part of my life is that I'm a conduit. I'm a conduit. Like, I don't feel that all the songs come from inside me. I feel like they come from this universal energy. And if I close my eyes, it's like I can picture this universal energy almost having like a golden hue. And this universal energy is, definitely generous and loving and always there as long as I remain receptive. And the only time in my life that it didn't or wasn't there for me was when I tried to direct it. So now what I realized was that I had a higher power for my music, and I didn't have a higher power to save my own life.
Mm.
And at that moment, like, if you consider like the qualities of, what they say that your higher power should have, being loving and caring, right? And how you're supposed to like surrender to your will to the higher power. Well, what was my writer's block but the higher power not being there when I wasn't surrendering my will, to its creative force? Like, there's a lot of parallels that really ring true to what I already had inside myself. And at that point, I started bawling. I must have looked crazy to everybody else in the group because Gabriel wasn't sharing on something emotional. And then I shared what had happened with me, and then it made sense for everybody else. But it was from that point forward that I realized that it was okay enough for me to use that same higher power, you know, the universal creative energy. And that's what it's been for me ever since. Because
Mm.
it's something that I already believed in. It's something that I already pictured. It's something that is, never let me down when I just let it be the driver. So this epiphany essentially was learning how to take that surrender of creativity into practicing those principles in all my affairs from the spiritual principles.
Hmm. So you mentioned a couple of things here, and I just took some notes. When you were waking up in that unfamiliar house, you said something to the effect of, "And I finally realized that it was okay to stop." And then just
Mm,
more recently here, you said you realized that it was okay to believe in a higher power. So there was something
mm,
inside. There's sort of a duality going on inside of you, where there's something that's telling you it's not okay to stop. There's something that's telling you it's not okay to believe. So I'm wondering if that's been a realization of yours, that you're having this internal conversation and granting yourself permission to take action and to believe.
I have come through the program to see that our problem as addicts is actually a conscious separation inside our body. There's like a duality that occurs in addiction between who we think we are and what our actions are. And the further that those two things get apart in our addiction, are the more pain and suffering that we're experiencing.
Mm.
And so, my desire to stop using was also coupled with my physical addiction to keep using. And, there was, my desire to be an honest, loving person was also coupled with an honest desire to keep using and trapped in my addiction. And, it's that duality that keeps us sick.
Mm.
And, so it like I'd said, it was like, suffering and torturous near the end of my addiction because I was creating delusional resentments that were driving force of, like, I was amplifying any potential conflict so that it was a scapegoat for using.
Mhm.
You know, I would like you could do something and I would fly off the handle for it with intolerance,
Mm-hmm.
really, and mask that as you hurting me and me having the right to be mad at you and watch me go use. Or
Mm-hmm.
was about my parents and like I felt like I was mourning them for 3 years while they were still alive as an excuse to go use. You know, the sick parents getting high and my solacing my woes. And it wasn't even my sickness. And I was wasting some of the most precious years I've had the opportunity to be with them in my addiction. There's something with the surrender, and I call it like the Jedi mind trick of the whole program. You win the war by putting your weapons down.
Mm-hmm.
And for years and years and years, in my brain was got to get more, got to get more, got to use. I'm using. And now I got to be thinking about using next time while I'm using now. I got to make sure there's more. Got to make sure there's something for tomorrow. Got to make sure there's something for tomorrow. Okay, yeah. So if I give some to Daniel now, Daniel might have some for me tomorrow. So then it's like, and all these weird little conversations that I would call like, you know, the compulsion, obsession, insanity dialogue going on in my head. That was probably occupying 30 to 50% of my brain
Mm-hmm.
inside active addiction. And near the end, it was probably occupying even like 70% because it had gotten to like, now it's got the delusions that I'm using to continue using, and how many lies I've got stacked on that I got to try to remember. And when I woke up that morning, it was like, pop, gone.
Mm-hmm.
And continuing that into what I was instantly learning in that treatment center was like, that fight's not mine anymore. I haven't had the compulsion to use as long as I keep myself in the middle of this program. And you know, I've had 3 using dreams, but I've never had a point where I'm like, using's my solution since then.
Mm-hmm.
And it has been like the most relieving thing ever. Like I'm almost crying now. Like it was so torturous, so painful, and being free of that, you know, like there. I have a bunch of sponsees and you know, and I'm active in a few different groups, and I see a lot of people, and I can really see, man, when someone hasn't had a good surrender and they're still fighting that fight, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful that I skidded to such a shitty stop, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like it really set me free.
Yeah.
And, you know, and now I have no desire. Like I love being in recovery. I'm loving learning how to become better for everybody in my life and for myself. I'm enjoying, like, I used to be a 0 or 11 person, pushing for
Mm-hmm.
14, right? And I never knew what that serenity felt like at a 6 or 7,
Mm-hmm.
ever. And it's like now I'm getting glimmers. I called them glimmers. I get a glimmer of like a 6 or 7. And in those moments, I'm just like, this moment, this day, this life is enough.
Tell us about getting out of treatment.
Okay. So in the treatment center, you know, they want you to get to a step 6 in order to graduate or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
I did like a treatment center full set of steps while I was in there.
Mm-hmm.
Had some really profound experiences surrounding, you know, step 4 to step 6.
Yeah. So,
And
and
I don't know.
step four being guilt and resentments, fearless, moral, and fearless and searching moral inventory. Step five is, like that's the one that takes 6 hours to basically spill all the beans to another human being. And step six is becoming willing, right?
Mhm. So I like to, you know, misname step 4 as the moral inventory that made me fearless
Hmm.
versus the fearless moral inventory, because my step 4 like, I was a willing and ready student. I wanted to get as much shit cleared out of my past as possible. I did like 120 page step four. Like they were like, stop writing. And I was like, no, I'm like, like, and because as I was doing it, it was teaching me about my delusions. It was teaching me about how reality really was. Like I thought there was going to be a lineup, this like 40 people long, owing me apologies from my resentments. I was like, man, I got to make sure I include everybody so they can all come apologize to me when I get out of treatment center.
For
I'm not
1
kidding.
year.
Yeah. And then I realized, oh, my part. Okay. Actually, you should form a line over there and I'll hit y'all up one by one. But when I did my step 5, it was the first 36 hours of my life that I had guilt free. Like I really had guilt embedded into me through my Catholic education, through being an altar boy, through my family. And I could work a 12-hour day as a carpenter and feel guilty buying myself a Snickers bar on the way home.
Mm,
Like it was just, I had built-in guilt. I never thought any of that was ever going to be part of me going to treatment. Like anybody out there who's resistant to treatment, I'm telling you, it can change your life. Do not fear it. There's so much more there than you can even imagine if you're just willing and ready to do some work on yourself. And it's not comfortable. But
mm,
when I dove deep and really saw my part in everything, awareness again, like when I learn something on an instrument, I feel like I look in a window and for one day, I maybe can see the shape of that room. But now that I know that room's there, I can keep working at that skill until I can open the door and go into the room. And recovery is the same way. It's like I got to see what life could be like if I change. And now it's a progression of trying and failing, getting a little bit, trying and failing, trying and failing. And there's moments that I get to go into that room of serenity where it's an indescribable feeling of satiation about life.
mm,
And so coming out of the treatment center, Mr. Pink Cloud, Milan, ooh, 3 hours
mhm,
later having a fight with my wife, feeling like I
mm,
lost all traction, feeling like I'm a loser, like everything that I just learned was a joke, you know? Um, like I wrote a song about it that day, like feels like feels like I lost all my traction. And it was humbling. It was
mm,
humbling and but I know that I had had an experience for 35 days that was unparalleled to anything else I'd ever been like in my life. And I knew that it was worth eating a little bit of humble pie, admitting that I still had so much work to do and keep working on it. Like I've done everything that they told me to do. And, my recovery it takes me, I'd say, an hour and a half each day because I like to do a meeting.
mhm,
But now I consider the podcast part of my recovery and I consider my sponsee time part of my recovery. So that's now up to 2.5 to 3 hours a day.
mhm.
But I'm trading that time, like that's the cost of freedom now from a 24-hour a day addiction.
Yeah.
And it's not like I have to do it. I love to do it,
Mm,
you know? Um, the song I wrote this morning, it's called the line in it was like embracing the constant state of change, because life is the constant state of change. And it's like, I think that a lot of the goal through recovery is gaining acceptance for that constant state of change. But now, I even want to take it one step further and I want to find joy in the quest for that acceptance,
mm,
you know? Like I did this meditation the other week, and one part of it was talking about trying to be the stillness of calm water, because
mm,
through that stillness of calm water is the only way that we can see reality as it is. So if we're not calm inside, we're distorting the view of reality, just like turbid water. So we have no response but to reflect back the world inaccurately. So our responses are not in harmony with the world. So it's like the only way that we can reflect back to people in a way that's going to bring them serenity is for us to actually reflect the world in a clear perspective. And the only way we can do that is by having that calmness and acceptance inside ourselves.
Wow. Be the
And
stillness in the water. That's amazing. I like that.
It's called Four Pebbles, and he does 4 different scenarios in it. Somebody put that on in a group I was in the other week, and it was transformative for me. It really just got me thinking since then, and because one of the things that I believe in life as a musician is that if you and me are having a conversation that is good for both of us, that there's going to be some frequency that's in tune between our personal vibrations as a being, and harmony is created by the even intersection of waves. Sound waves intersecting at even intervals is what harmony is. And irrational numbers don't intersect at even intervals, and that's what sounds out of tune. And so when we're arguing, it's because we're not in tune with each other, right? So if we can bring ourselves to that state of calmness, we have a greater chance of being in tune with the world around us.
So there's someone out there right now listening who's struggling like you were. What would you tell them?
I would tell them, don't wait. There is happiness, serenity, and joy inside sobriety. You don't need to lacquer your life with addiction to run away from things like I did for so long. It's not it's not a mental shortcoming to be an addict. It's something that you can recover from. There's help out there. And if I had had any inkling what treatment or recovery was like, I feel that, I wasted so many years in pain when I didn't need to be. And right now I'm in love with the quest for recovery, and I'm here to help.
Where can people find you? Where can people find your podcast? What's it called? And where can people find your music?
Okay, the podcast is called Recovery Freedom Rising, and it's pretty much on every platform now. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and then I don't know, the podcast service has put it even places that I don't even understand the name. Nobody I know goes on them, but it's pretty much on everyone out there now. We just hit our 30th episode. You can email me at recoveryfreedomrising@gmail.com. You can contact me, Milan Starcic, through Facebook. And my music is on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio. And just look up Milan Starcic. And I guess maybe Daniel will have my name printed out somewhere in the notes.
Yeah. There.
Awesome. And I just want to say, Daniel, thank you for having me here today. It was a unique experience, and I enjoy your questions, your mind, and the format how you deliver it here.
Well, and likewise, thanks so much for joining me today. Taking 2.5 hours out of your day here to bring some hope to my community, and I look forward to watching you grow, watching you learn. Checking out the podcast, and maybe if you'd be so humble to invite me to share my journey on your show, I'd be happy to consider that. And I guess that's it, man. We'll cap it there.
I would love it. Okay, thanks, Daniel. Take care.
Say, this is Hard Knocks Talks.